Hello and welcome. Today, we re-embarking on a deep dive into one of history's most fascinating and complex phenomena, the Viking raids, often labeled as the terror of the Northmen. In the next 10 minutes, we'll peel back the layers of myth and examine historical lens, the socio-political, economic, military, and cultural dynamics behind these events. Let's set sail into a world where fear, innovation, and cultural transformation converged on the high seas. To truly grasp the magnitude of the Viking raids, we must first understand the environment from which they emerged. The Viking Age, conventionally dated from 793 AD to 1066 AD, was not simply an era of unprovoked violence. Instead, it was the result of profound social, economic, and environmental shifts in Scandinavia. Recent scholarship indicates that climatic fluctuations transitioning from the relative warmth of the late 8th century to a cooler, more challenging environment placed unprecedented stress on agricultural yields. This, combined with increasing population pressures and the rigid hierarchies within Norse societies, created an incentive for expansion. For many young warriors and enterprising traders, raiding and seafaring were viable paths to wealth and social mobility. Furthermore, the decentralized political structure of Scandinavia, lacking a strong centralized authority, meant that local chieftains and jarls could sponsor expeditions with little interference. In essence, the drive for exploration and plunder was as much a response to internal dynamics as it was an opportunistic exploitation of the external world. The image of the Vikings as mere bloodthirsty raiders is only a part of the story. Economic imperatives played a central role in fueling their expansive ventures. Norse societies were not isolated tribes but active participants in a complex web of trade networks that spanned from the Arctic to the Mediterranean. Archaeological findings from silver hoards to intricate weaponry suggest that many expeditions were dual-purposed, to raid, yes, but also to establish trade routes and political alliances. The very longships that we associate with swift, surprise attack raids were also the backbone of their trading empire. These technologically advanced vessels, with their clinker-built hulls and shallow drafts, allowed Vikings to navigate both the open ocean and narrow, inland waterways with equal prowess. Additionally, the Scandinavian society itself was undergoing transformation, with a warrior ethos deeply embedded in their culture evident in the sagas and mythic narratives. The Norse saw valor in both combat and exploration. Their social structure, which combined elements of egalitarian assembly, the thing, with aristocratic leadership, provided a unique context in which raiding was not solely about destruction, but also about asserting social status and redistributing wealth. Let's now dissect the mechanics of a Viking raid. The archetypal raid on the Lindisfarne monastery in 793 AD is often cited as the spark that ignited the Viking Age. Contemporary monastic annals describe the event in language that evokes both awe and terror. However, when analyzed through a modern academic lens, this attack and others like it reveals a calculated interplay of military innovation and psychological warfare. The Vikings' mastery of naval technology cannot be overstated. Their longships were marvels of engineering, designed for speed, agility, and stealth. With a shallow draft that enabled navigation in both open seas and river estuaries, these vessels allowed raiders to strike unexpectedly at coastal and inland targets. Such tactical advantages enabled small bands of warriors to outmaneuver and outpace the heavily armored armies of their adversaries. Moreover, the raids were not solely acts of plunder. They served as precise instruments of power projection. By striking at key economic and religious centers, the Vikings disrupted established power structures, forcing emerging European states to adapt rapidly. Contemporary records from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle to the Unalbertiniani speak of a terror that was as psychological as it was physical. Local populations, unprepared for such swift and brutal incursions, were forced to re-examine their defensive strategies, which in turn catalyzed significant political and military reforms across Europe. Beneath the surface of these martial exploits lay a rich cultural and religious framework that both justified and celebrated the Viking way of life. Norse mythology, with its pantheon of gods such as Odin, Thor, and Freyja, imbued the warriors with a sense of destiny and inevitability. The heroic sagas, later immortalized in the Eddas, portrayed raiding as not just an act of survival or ambition, but as a sacred duty, a path to glory and eternal remembrance. This deeply ingrained ethos is evident in the concept of fate or word, which permeated Norse culture. In a world where life was as unpredictable as the seas they sailed, the belief in a predetermined destiny both emboldened and comforted the raiders. Their actions, often interpreted as the fulfillment of divine prophecy, contributed to the aura of invincibility that allowed them to operate on the fringes of both the known and the unknown. Furthermore, the Vikings were not solely warriors. Their culture embraced art, craftsmanship, and oral traditions that celebrated not only conquest, but also the intricate tapestry of everyday life. This duality between the brutal and the beautiful offers a counterpoint to the simplistic narrative of the Vikings as mere barbarians. Instead, we see a people whose raids, while fearsome in execution, were but one aspect of a vibrant and multifaceted society. As the Viking age waned, the impact of these expeditions left an indelible mark on Europe. The so-called terror they inspired catalyzed significant social, political, and economic transformations. In England, for instance, the pressure from repeated raids played a pivotal role in the eventual unification of disparate kingdoms, while in Normandy, the legacy of Viking settlement contributed to the emergence of a powerful duchy that would shape European history for centuries. Modern historiography has evolved considerably. Where medieval chroniclers depicted the Vikings solely as agents of chaos, contemporary scholars recognize them as complex actors in a dynamic historical process. Recent genetic studies, comprehensive archaeological surveys, and refined analyses of primary texts have all contributed to a more nuanced narrative. Today, we understand that the Viking raids were not isolated acts of savagery, but part of a broader pattern of cultural exchange, economic integration, and political realignment that ultimately paved the way for the medieval European order. In conclusion, the history of the Viking raids, often sensationalized as the terror of the Northmen, is far more complex than the popular myth suggests. These expeditions were driven by a convergence of environmental pressures, economic incentives, technological innovations, and cultural imperatives. They reshaped the medieval world, leaving legacies that are still evident in our modern landscapes and cultural narratives.